Good evening from London, and today we're going to be looking at a £2 billion decline in tax, a report by HMRC with regards to buy-to-let landlords. I'm excited to just jump in and dig into some stats. I am reporting today from a different location as to my office. Hopefully, the audio and visuals are still going to be working and we don't have any technical issues. But hopefully, we'll have someone jump on and give me a shout if there are any issues on the other end. So we are at 6:30 in the evening now. We are running on time. And again, an overall today is going to be a report by HMRC reporting a £2 billion decline. And we're just going to be looking at why that is, what has impacted landlords. Is this because they've been exiting the market? Is it because they've been looking at other strategies? Or is it just landlords dodging HMRC and the taxman? I don't know. Let's have a look together, and we've come to a conclusion. As always, I love to be just reviewing this data and interpreting it as we go along. I always love to hear from you. So any thoughts on your end, just leave me a comment below, and I'll be sure to pick up. So yeah, we can hear me. Amazing. That's always great to know. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some stats. Now, if any of you have been following media, in the last 3 to 4 weeks, HMRC have provided us with some stats and a report as to what buy-to-let landlords have been doing, especially when it looks at 2020, 2022, 2023 compared to 2024. So I'm going to hopefully be able to share this article with you. Great. So this article is from Landlords Zone, and we've got landlords' income from renting drops by £2 billion as attacks continue. So clearly this report is putting this against the actual exit. When it talks about the attacks, we are talking about the government and their stand on landlord bashing, because of course it is the landlord's fault that we have a rental and housing crisis. So this report's by Nigel Lewis, and we've got the government could trigger a rental crisis if attack on private landlords continue, warns a leading tax advisory expert, amid overall drop in rental income. So latest figures, official figures, show that income from rental property declared by unincorporated landlords fell from 49 billion in 2021-2022 to 47 billion in 2022 to 2023, while total income from UK furnished holiday lets also fell from 2.5 billion 2021-2022 to 2.2 billion. So 2022-2023. So Heather Powell, head of property at Blick Roversberg, believes that if the government doesn't stop imposing costly tax rises and legislation on private landlords, tenants will be left without homes. And this is an interesting point, guys, because if you've been following my videos, you'll know that the amount of properties available right now in comparison to pre-pandemic levels, it continues to be very, very low. So at the moment, where it comes to that demand and that supply, it comes down to why their tenants are, of course, finding it challenging. And this isn't sustainable. I mean, this isn't good news for landlords, by the way. This is bad news for overall the whole sector. We do want a sustainable and a healthy rental market for all. Tenants, of course, it's a win-win, whether it's a tenant, a landlord, and being able to provide that supply. The question is that supply the responsibility of landlords? And there comes the question when it comes to labor, whereby they claim to be able to build this 1.5 billion homes, and how they're going to be able to achieve that. Most importantly, how many of these homes are actually going to be affordable? Because what we have been seeing is a lot of green light when it comes to property developers, especially in that build to rent sector. And in fact, let me share that with you, because that's an interesting stat to look at. We saw a most recent stat from Savills, when it comes to build to rent, in how they are really drumming up more and more build to rent in the sector. And of course, what we do know for this particular market is that rentals don't come cheap when it comes to build to rent. These providers are looking at rental property that have great facilities in very good locations, and if anything, is going to push rents up. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan is here, because what's much needed here in the UK is affordable housing. So if you look at this article, and I shared this with you a few weeks back, because the second quarter of 2024 saw 1.2 billion of investment activity, where single family housing accounted for 816 million, 77% of the total. This is encouraging, and we expect momentum to build throughout the second half of the year. So what will be interesting is this report for the second half of the year, how that plays out, which is all to do with regards to build to rent. And again, if you have been following my channel, what we do all know is that we have different organizations sort of getting in the bandwagon when it comes to this build to rent, included investment funds, banks, insurance company like General and Legal, the likes of Nest are now in on it as well. Lloyd's, retailers like John Lewis. So it seems that this is the trend. And maybe as we look into this a little bit more deeper, maybe the landlord doesn't really even care that they're not getting that tax is going down from a smaller landlord point of view, from those incorporated, because there is a bigger plan here with these bigger incorporated landlords and big funds coming in, and that's going to easily replace that drop of £2 billion. I mean, again, I'm just interpreting the data. Will be interesting to find out your thoughts on this. If you feel that this is a viable route, if there's any truth on this. Okay, so going back to the article, and again, guys, feel free to ask any questions. That's what we're here for. We do want this to be interactive with everyone. So going back to this report. So the statistics published today show that 2.81 million, by the way, I'm going to put this into perspective and look at the date on this. This was the September 2nd, so just over a month ago from today's release, from today's live. So published today show that 2.81 million individuals reported income from rental properties in 2022 to 2023 to HMRC, accounting for 44.7 billion of rent. The number of private landlords declaring rental income has also increased slightly from 2018 to 2023. However, the government needs to ensure that landlords do not decide to sell up, or there will be major decrease of homes available for rent. Unincorporated landlords have faced a tsunami of legislation in the last 10 years. This has included a restriction in the proportion of their mortgage interest that can be deducted when calculating their tax liability. So, to put things into perspective, we looked at 10 years. It's talking about 10 years, and what exactly are they talking about? Well, if we go back to the George Osborne era, 2016, we have the announcement, of course, with regards to the increased stamp duty for second homes, first of all, which went up, I believe, is 3%. So that's number one. That had a barrier to entry for a lot of landlords getting their foot into the buy-to-let property industry in the first place, and then potentially even put off a few other landlords and expanding their portfolio. And that was the purpose of this, by the way. It was saying that the buy-to-let industry wasn't sustainable and is getting out of hand, and this was the government sort of putting their stamp on it. And by the way, this was conservative. I know that a lot of landlords and a lot of people out there think that conservative are landlord friendly, but we've seen a few of legislations like I'm sharing here today that have not in fact been very friendly. So you had the stamp duty increase. We also had the biggest one, which has hurt landlords the most, especially as mortgage increase in the last few years, which was the implementation of Section 24, the fading out of landlords being able to use that expense, that interest rates of mortgage as an expense that was faded out. I believe that was between 2017 to 2020, 2020 and replaced by something that isn't really that great or helpful. So if I'm going to be bold, and again, this is just to simplify things, landlords are getting tax on profit that they're not even making. It's not even profit. After paying interest rates, they're left with X amount, but the government doesn't care. You're getting taxed on Y. That's the second one. Then we also, of course, had the tax allowance change. The wear and tear tax allowance change. And of course, when we saw that mortgage rates increase, that impact of Section 24 was even more impactful. And in fact, if we look at Section 24, now that we are talking about tax and this is relevant, let me share with you the impact of Section 24, because we in fact have a report here by Property Mark, which talks about that impact, the impact of Section 20, the impact of Section on, so you can't see the 24, I can't see it, but you can. If I get this out of the way, here you are. So the impact of Section 24 on buy-to-let landlords in England. So it's a very long report, but I can tell you the conclusion of it, which was very much, it did have an impact from reduced investment viability. As a result of Section 24, several landlords reported they were concerned about the financial viability of the private renter sector investment. I'm massively affected by not being able to claim all the interest payment deducted. This questions whether this portfolio remains financially viable. And of course, this was the same mindset of many landlords over the course of recent years. Financial and non-financial impacts. Given the break-even and loss-making positions being sustained, it is not surprising that some landlords reported being financially squeezed under financial stress or in financial hardship because of Section 24. Although the severity of impacts differed, several landlords suggested that their living standard had been compromised. Now, of course, if their living standards are being compromised, naturally, that has a ripple effect on tenants. In what way? Well, that can take in many ways. It could be landlords cutting corners. Now, I'm not justifying this in any way, but it could be landlords cutting corners and keeping their property up to date by having that impact of Section 24, and of course having an impact on their financial situation. They're going to be cutting corners, and also it could be, and that's going to affect the tenant, and of course deciding to actually exit the market. Again, who does that impact? It impacts the tenants themselves. So there you have an unintended consequences from the government intervention. And if you're a tenant, a renter listening to this, it will be interesting to find out your thoughts as to what the government is doing at the moment. Is it helping tenants in any way? And not only what they're doing at the moment, but what they've been doing over the course of several years, including the Conservative. Do you feel as a renter that it's been helpful, or you've seen no impact, or you've seen a negative impact? It will be interesting to find out your thoughts from a renter point of view. So non-tax deductible means I'm losing £50,000. So these are kind of testimonials, but higher tax banding, reduced child tax benefit, steps taken to mitigate against the impact. So these are steps taken from landlords to mitigate against the impact of Section 24. So these include transferring ownership to private rented sector property to a spouse or partner in lower tax banding, transferring property into a limited company, which we've seen a lot. Landlords that don't do this simply, I can't see how you can make this viable if you don't incorporate. Paying down mortgages, selling one or more properties, which we've seen a lot of that, reducing costs or increasing rents, amongst others. Each option has its strengths and weakness, and not all will be palatable or feasible for landlords. In some subsections below, we explore some of the mitigation strategies. It's interesting because, we'll dive a little bit more deeper into this, but it's interesting that I didn't see there landlords diversifying their strategy on their property, because if anything I do know is that a lot of landlords decided to jump on the short let because the short let industry, because it simply wasn't viable to continue on the long let, and that again is an unintended consequence from the ongoing situation with government intervention and the increase in regulation. So incorporation was one when we looked at that. Increased rents, as noted earlier, property market predicted from the outset that the rent increase would be a byproduct of Section 24. So that was a consequence with regards to that. And we see this average rent annual inflation, this goes through the roof. And by the way, there is a pattern here, and this is important. Okay, this is my view, and let me know if you agree on this. So the Section 24 was implemented in 2017, right? And yet we see the rent still low here. But again, it was faded out during this period. And you can see this sort of going up here. And there is a dip here in 2020, but of course, this is during the pandemic. And then what we see here, in my view, one of the biggest reasons, of course, inflation taken into account, but mortgage rates. So that Section 24 really didn't become really painful until those mortgage rates doubled, and in some cases even tripled for a lot of investors out there. And that's where we can see kind of this huge uplift here on rent increases. So, anyone has any questions so far, I'm happy to take. How will rising mortgage rates affect rental prices in the short term? Well, the mortgage rates have started to stabilize somewhat. Of course, nothing like what we saw in the rates pre-pandemic. But if you're waiting for that, who's this wise process? You're going to have to wait for a long time. For those landlords, at least those new landlords who came into the market in recent years, you may have thought that the cheap money that we saw in the recent years was the norm. And the fact is, it's not the norm. If you've been in the market for 20 odd years or more, you'll know that that wasn't normal. That cheap money era has come to an end. And I'm not sure whether we'll see that again. And if we will, I think that's going to be a long time from where we are now. But Danny, what factors am I looking at that would help me find buy to let is a good or bad decision? Every individual is different, Samantha. So from your point of view, it depends on whether you're looking at cash flow immediately. Are you looking at capital growth? Or are you looking at a steady combination of both? It really depends. But one thing I will say is if you can make the numbers work in today's market, then you can certainly expect it to improve over the course of the next few years. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but that's the trend where we're going to. We're going across sort of a more sustainable increased rent. Those double digits were not sustainable. It's not a good thing, by the way, whether you're a landlord or a tenant. But sustainable rental growth, whilst we see mortgage rates gradually starting to come down. In fact, we are predicted to be around about the 4% mark, 3 to 4% mark at some point at the end of 2025. Certainly 4%, based on some stats that I've seen out there. I hope that's helpful. As long as you balance both out, I think that should be fine. Before I go on to a little bit more questions, I did want to continue to dive in and not divert too much away from the topic today, which is the £2 billion decline in tax when it comes to buy-to-let landlords. So if you just jumping in, we had talked about the statistics published today, which was a couple of months, sorry, not even a couple of months, 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, showed that 2.81 million individuals reported income from rent property in 2022-2023. We're talking about where were we? The income fell from 4.9 billion 2021-2022 to 4.7 billion 2022 to 2023. I did want to dive into this other article, which gives another perspective as well. Where are we? Let's head straight into the HMRC published report, by the way. So here we are. And of course, they are going to report from their perspective, but key points here. So we have the total number of unincorporated land that declared income from renting property 2022 to 23 was 2.84 million. Of these 2.84 million unincorporated landlords, 88% claimed some form of expense. Property income is concentrated in London. In 2022 to 2023, 17% of unincorporated landlords were based in London, accounting for 24% of property income for incorporated landlords. That's interesting. And a good question to follow would be, why is that? Um, and I'm going to have to do some research about this. I mean, if any of you know me, I'm quite geeky about this, and that is certainly something that I like to find out and dive into. So this release covers data from the last 5 available tax years from 2018 to 2019, 2022 to 23. So income from all UK property. UK property income can be declared on ITSA returns by a variety of different tax entities. So tax entity, individual, partnerships, total. The key points from the table are the total rent income declared by incorporated landlords, 2018 and 2019. So you can see here, it dips, it goes up and continues to dip again here, 2022 to 2023. Figure 1 demonstrates slightly increasing trend between 2018 and 2019. Okay. Figure 2, average rent income per landlord declared by incorporated landlords. I mean, nothing huge happening there when you look at the graphs. Anyway, I want to jump into a few more articles here. There you are. So tax attacks threaten buy-to-let, say, senior financial services. This is more looking at the government if the government does not stop imposing costly tax rises and legislation on private landlord, tenants will be left without homes, warns the prominent financial service figures. Again, if you are a rental or landlord, do you feel that there's any truth of this, or you welcome corporations and big build-to-rent companies coming in and filling that gap? And good riddance to landlords. We won't miss them. I'm just interested. I'm just curious. So Heather Powell, head of property at East Blick, says 2.81 million individual reported income from rental properties, which is what we saw in that report, accounted by 44.7 billion. We've seen all of this already. So she writes on her company website, unincorporated landlords have faced a tsunami of legislation in the last 10 years, which I've already shared with you with the George Osborne era. The latest tier of legislation faced by landlords, the requirement to have their properties assessed in accordance with the Energy Performance Certificate, which, of course, we know by Miliband, who is coming in, and we're looking to expect that at some point in 2030. The current government has announced that they aim to ensure homes let have an EPC of B by 2030. I don't necessarily know many properties that, 2030 may look like a long way away, but actually we're looking 5 years. I've not seen many properties that have an EPC of B, except for those new builds, except for those build to rent properties. Again, those are the properties that are going to be compliant, and landlords who are old school and have the property portfolio will need to put their hand in the pocket. So yeah, this is another form of tax which will be hitting landlords quite hard. The current government has announced that they ensure homes have homes to let have an EPC of B by 2030. While the narrative where practical and affordable was included in the announcement, many properties owned by private landlords cannot be upgraded to a B. That is right, especially when you have those period conversions, which there's a lot of, especially in London, and I'm sure other parts of the UK as well, of England. So private landlords are now considering their options, especially as the forecast of future growth in the price of homes is low. So combine this forecast with the cost of remortgaging when fixed rate loans mature, the threat of requirement to upgrade homes for costs that will significantly exceed the increase in rents that could be charged. Let me repeat that. Combined this forecast, so private landlords now considering their options, especially as forecast of future growth in the price of homes is low. Combine this forecast with the cost of remortgaging when fixed rates loans mature, the threat of a requirement to upgrade homes for costs that will significantly exceed the increase in rents that could be charged, many decide to sell up, especially if the expected change in capital gain rates is imposed from April 2025. So again, we are expecting the budget announcement in October. Well, we are in October in a couple of weeks, and this is something that, of course, has a lot of landlords spooked. Whereas there will be a capital gain tax imposed for April 2025. So to recap what we just reviewed here is they are saying that the rental growth expected in the next few years is going to be moderate. Now, moderate compared to what? Well, moderate compared to the last few years. It won't be sustainable if it continued that way anyway. We've seen 30% increase in rent across the country, especially here in London in recent years. That's now started to slow down. Naturally, a boom can't live forever, and the growth that we see in sort of an amount of 24 months, it's safe to say it was a boom. Now that has slowed down, in no way crashed, and no way going down, but the growth has slowed down. And that comparison to, of course, how mortgage rates have increased, and a lot of landlords will be hit, and the EPC sort of works that a landlord would be expected to do. That combination of all of that, that's what the article suggesting that won't be sustainable. And this is the reason for a lot of landlords selling up because of all the tax regulations and changes the government is bringing in. So to wrap up on this article, and then I'll go on to some questions. No one does like pop-ups, do they? So she says tenants are unlikely to be in a position to buy, and the delivery of new homes for rent has slowed due to the financial constraints faced by the registered social housing providers. Many graduates and key workers rent, and this could leave them without housing options, which will not help the economy. She concludes, changes to taxes and other legislation need to be carefully considered to ensure that homes are available where they are needed, which means private landlords need to be encouraged to remain in the sector. So, we're going to jump into some questions. Leslie, what does this decline in landlord tax revenue indicate about the future of the property market? I'm not sure what you mean by what does it indicate. I guess it indicates that the government is wanted to hit landlords even harder than what they were before. It also indicates that the government is looking to fill in a deficit, a gap. I mean, if we know anything, I believe it was by Angela Rayner. And she has been going on about this for several weeks now, that the previous government has left us in a bit of a pickle. And there is, I don't know how many millions of pounds gap, which they now need to fill in. And they have promised that they wouldn't increase the national insurance and sort of other taxes to from workers. So now they're left sort of looking elsewhere if they're going to, of course, fulfill that promise. And I think landlords is an easy route to look at. So that's what it indicates. It indicates the government is looking to fill in that gap, that deficit. So Stephen James, are there regions in the UK where buy-to-let remain profitable despite these changes? I think there are quite a few regions. I mean, that's not the purpose of this live stream, but certainly with tax hikes that we're seeing and profit sort of margins becoming smaller and smaller, it is important to make sure that you can get proper yields. But please, Stephen, and again, it depends on your strategy. Don't focus purely based on yield. If you go down that route, what we do know is the higher the yield, the higher the risk. And that higher risk, in most part, will come as the form of tenants having sort of a smaller pool of good tenants. And with the removal of Section 21, potentially, that is the last place that you want to be in. In fact, I encourage you to watch a video which is going to be released this weekend, which is the number one mistake that landlords are making. And I promise you, it has nothing to do with Labour's new policies. Because the problem is, what we're seeing is that we're seeing property investors looking at this new renters' rights bill coming in as the biggest risk to buy to let. But being an old school, being in property for such a long time, and I have an old school mindset. And when I review this from a holistic point of view, I can see that the renters' right bill isn't the major problem. There is a number one mistake that landlords are making again and again and again, regardless of whatever the government does right now. And that's going to be revealed in that video this weekend. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe so you can keep up to date with that. Releasing on Saturday. So are we looking on an impact that these changes will have on tenants and rental availability in the long term? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's shared here, right? I mean, if you're just joining us, James, or anyone else, what we did see was the impact. This was the impact on Section 24, of course, and this was a tax change. So what we did see was that how this change impacted. And of course, in a couple of years, I'm sure property market is going to do a report on the impact or any changes that the government is doing right now. But if we look at this alone, I wouldn't be surprised if the impact was going to be anything close to this. Which, if we see here, the average rent amount, annual inflation. But hang on, let me look at here. Yeah. So if we look at the annual inflation of rent, I think this report at least suggests that a lot of this was the impact of the introduction of Section 24. If we look at the average rent inflation, we can see here 2017 it was coming down, 2018 coming down, then suddenly in 2018. And what happened here, by the way? What happened was that Section 24 started to be implemented between 2017 and 2020. So while some landlords, of course, didn't feel the full pain here, they started to feel it right here, 2020, when it was fully implemented. But then it was when mortgage rates really increased, when it really went through the roof here. So, of course, there are other factors influencing it, but according to Property Mark, this is what has driven the rents to increase. If you look here, rent increases are driven by a broad range of factors, and it's difficult to identify the extent to which increases are directly attributed to whether which increases are directly attributed to Section 24. Regardless, the qualitative data provided by landlords suggests that Section 24 has had an impact. For example, some landlords noted that they plan to increase rents as a direct result of Section 24. How do we know that? Well, Property Mark and other organizations do very good jobs with regards to survey. Of course, they leverage and they make the most of the data that they have and the members that they have, and they ask the questions. And some of those questions were, what are you planning to do to mitigate some of that Section 24? And a lot of them answered that they were looking to sell or increase rents or diversify the portfolio. Mortgage costs can no longer be deducted in the long term. Extra financial burden will be passed in on and form of rent increases. It is forcing costs to be passed on to the tenants when I'd rather keep rent at the same level. This reminds me, by the way, of a video that I did, which a lot of renters weren't happy about, which was landlords forced to raise rents. And this is just an indication of that. Landlords are forced to raise rents because the government, of course, not in every case, but the government, of course, is interfering in the market, which then has unintended consequences. And I get it. The rental crisis there needs to be a solution. I'm with renters, I'm with tenants in that. And landlords, rogue landlords, they need to be very quickly taken out of the market. Yet, when you have these unintended consequences, they're not helping the very people the government says they're going to help, then that is a problem. It is a huge issue. I was going to share something which was relevant on this, and it's completely. Yeah, no, I've lost my trail of thought. But it was with regard to those rent increases. But here you are, another landlord. For the first time, we've had to increase the rent of two of properties with each tenant's mental health issues. Um, so yeah, I mean, you got landlords here sort of sharing their experience, and this goes to what we just discussed as well, which was the switch to furnished holiday lets. A lot of landlords to make ends meet with regards to these tax changes have decided to go here. But of course, the government is working towards um, reducing the amount of short lets. What they're going to implement to make sure that this happens, I'm not exactly sure. But they have indicated, and I know Property Mark themselves as well have said that they are pushing to level up the playing field so that short-term rentals don't have bigger benefits comparison to long lets, so that their members could continue to provide long-term, the much needed long-term rental properties in the rental market. So I'm just going to look here and see if there's any other questions in the meantime. For all of you who have been online so far, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And for those of you just joining, again, we have looked at several articles here today, and that includes, but not exclusively, looking at the the drop, landlord income from renting drops by 2 billion as attacks continue. We've looked at different articles here. We also jumped into, I don't know if you can still hear me, but I believe my AirPods are running out. If you can still hear me, let me know, because we may have to wrap up very shortly because of the mic going down. So we have, how can landlords, let me read this. Let me know, guys, if you can hear me. I'm going to check here with my technical support. And as long as you can still hear me, we can continue with Andrew's question, which is good stuff. Thank you, Tim. So how can landlords adapt to a new regulation without sacrificing profitability? Tax advisor. That's the very first thing I'll be doing. Speak to a tax advisor, see how you can adjust, make sure you can be tax efficient, and also speak to a property expert to see how you can maximize on your rental income, whether that be refurbishment, whether that be diversifying your portfolio for students, short-term rental, HMOs, whatever that may be, corporate company lets. You need to speak to a property expert, tax advisor. And actually, I'm going to be speaking about how you can create a team around you to make sure you can be profitable. That's probably going to be my next video, Andrew. Thank you for that question. Tim Robert, thank you for the information, Danny. What are the potential risks of exiting the market versus staying in under new regulations? Well, the first thing I will say, the risk is you making a bad decision, Tim. I did release a video with regards to selling up and landlord selling up. And I think you really need to speak to a property expert, review your situation, and see if it does make sense for you to sell up. It may make sense. It may make sense because you have it in the wrong structure, whether maybe you have your property in a wrong area where increases the risk of you having the wrong type of tenant. And with the removal of Section 21, that's probably a too big a risk that you'd like to take. Again, you have to look at different factors. The only way you're going to be able to do that and decide whether right now is a good time for you to exit the market is going to be based on looking at working with different professionals, including a tax expert and a property expert. The only thing I will ask, if any will view online, don't exit the market just because of all the noise in the media and all the scaremongering. That's the last thing you want to do, Tim. A lot of scaremongering there. Guilty. I am also partly to blame with that, especially with our titles. But we are here to share the real data and interpret that, and so for you guys to make an informed decision. But one thing I can't do is give financial advice. That's not what we're here for. But certainly to interpret data. Agenda 2030 is unfolding and happening. The 1%, BlackRock and Vanguard are going for total control over the masses. You'll own nothing and be happy. Well, that's an interesting point there, because I certainly have this this article here, right, which talks about build to rent, which I shared with you, which is going on full steam ahead for the first half, and they're looking to see the second half of the build to rent and see how that looks. But we can see that there's double-digit growth was never sustainable. Okay, this is talking about the rent, but demand for build to rent remains high, with build to rent homes in the UK's largest cities still letting 25% faster than they did in pre-pandemic levels. And to put things into perspective, and down to your question, or your point, your statement, should I say, Franco, that build to rent and the big corps like BlackRock and Vanguard certainly in it to stay. Why are they in the market? Well, what we do know is that demand will continue to increase. The supply is just not enough, and the government is pushing it in every corner that they can because they obviously want to be able to fulfill their promise with 1.5 million homes. So those developers are all getting the green light. Developers, funds, banks, insurance, retailers like John Lewis, they're all getting a green light to move forward with this. And of course, with that comes tax as well. But are they going to get the same type of tax that they get from the smaller landlords, knowing that what we know, that sort of big corporations have loopholes to avoid tax? And I say avoid, I might get a backlash on this, to be more tax efficient. Surely, sort of like the likes of Amazon and Facebook, whereby they obviously pay sort of, I'll be surprised if they pay like £1 million or £2 million when they make billions of pounds. But there you are. That's my view. Yes, we can hear you. Okay, great. So I hope that makes sense. On that same topic, I did want to share with you, a lot of you guys, especially hearing about all these taxes and landlords sort of exiting the market and a potential hike of taxes in the next few weeks and for April 2025 implementation potentially again. What keeps landlords in business despite the impact that we've seen from Section 24 and that tax change, what we've seen, and the credible impact to landlords' pocket? What keeps landlords in business? And I just want to share the screen because I've shared this before. The new survey appears to lift the lid as to why landlords remain in the buy to let, despite the tax regulatory controls now making the sector so challenging. And Paragon Bank surveyed 500 landlords with up to 3 properties, okay? And with declared ambitions to build a larger portfolio. Key findings as to why they stayed involved include long-term rental demand. 6 in 10 landlords, 60%, cited the ongoing demand for rental properties as a key factor. Okay, retirement income. Over half of landlords, 54%, are looking to add properties to their portfolios as a means of supplementing their retirement income. Capital appreciation. And remember, this is where you will win in property. Yields are great, having that cash flow is great, and it's important. But capital growth is where you win, which is why we say that property is long-term investment. Nearly half of respondents, 47%, believe that long-term house price growth is a significant driver for their investment decisions, and a preference for property. Over a third of landlords prefer property as an investment asset over other options. And why is that? A lot of this is because a lot of landlords like the fact that their children can inherit their property. Yes, there are inheritance tax, but that's something that they like, and the fact that it's tangible, and the fact that they can diversify with property as well. This is something that you're limited when you have shares, bonds. You know, there's only so much you can do with that. With property, you can, in fact, be in a position whereby you have a family member can move in. You can go from long let to short let to HMO to student let to having a lodger. There's so much you can do with it, and that tangible aspect is something that's appealing to a lot of landlords. But when asked what property investment emphasized tangible, so here you are, to the point. When asked why those chose property over other investment, landlords emphasize its tangible nature, 67%. Wealth building, potential 54%, and look at this, and the ability to pass on as inheritance, 53%. So you see, I don't make these things up. This is data interpreted for you every time. So the rental market is attracting a growing number of landlords who are inspired by their friends and family or have discovered the benefits of property ownership through other circumstances. These aspiring landlords are committed to provide rental homes. So listen, guys, you may be thinking right now, well, I'm confused. On one hand, Danny, you're saying landlords are exiting the market and this is reducing the supply for homes for tenants, and tenants are going to be worse off. But on another side, you're saying, based on this Paragon survey, well, landlords are actually buying up. Well, to explain things, there is a different type of profile doing different things. And that's for several reasons. First of all, you have landlords who have been hit so hard in regards to taxes and perhaps have leveraged so much they don't have any space for growth. And the risk is far too much for them. They are deciding to sell up. Now, a lot of them are going to be also old school landlords who right now feel, you know what, right now is the right time for me to retire and cash out. And perhaps at the back of their mind also thinking, it was simple 20 years ago. Now with all the complexities, I'm good. I want to cash out now. And then you have those accidental landlords who, for whatever reason, be it because they inherited the property, divorce, upsized, and wasn't the right time to sell their first property. For whatever reason, they end up being a landlord with one or two properties, but they never intended to be a landlord. And therefore, those are the landlords who feel this is far too much for me. I'm good. I'm selling. What we've seen on the other hand is those landlords who have three or more properties, those landlords who treat as a business, who have incorporated, who are not impacted as huge as other landlords who haven't incorporated and can make those numbers work. Those landlords are actually scaling up. And it makes sense because once you incorporate, there are other costs and other responsibilities by having a limited company, which doesn't really make sense if you only have one or two properties. Those landlords are scaling up. And here's the other thing. Landlords are getting younger. We saw an article and a survey that we saw data telling us that more and more landlords who are applying for buy-to-let mortgages are becoming younger in their late 30s. So there's an appetite there for younger landlords, which is interesting, especially as we see sort of the younger generation who are against landlords, and yet there is also the younger generation who are becoming professional landlords. So interesting dynamic there, which, as you know me, I'm a bit of a geek. I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. Okay, so we have a few more questions, and I don't have my coffee or water here, but as long as you can hear me, I'm going to crack on. Would be good to know the pros and cons of switching to short-term let versus long-term rental investments. Great question. And actually, I'm going to share something with you on the short let wise process. I hope this is going to help. So right now we are having quite a few landlords who are on the fence of short-term rentals. And the reason being is because the government is looking at and reviewing as to what changes they're going to make to incentivize, or let's say, let's take away the incentivize to divert landlords and make short-term rental less appealing so that they can keep their long-term rental properties on the market. But one thing that we saw, which was surprising, and if you guys haven't watched this video, you want to go back 2 weeks ago, we posted whereby Airbnb had little to no impact based on a report that they had little to no impact on the long-term rental market, because we had Labour and other governments, even probably before that, claiming that, and this was a specific Labour MP actually, claiming that thousands of homes had been lost to Airbnb, especially when it came to London. But then this report came out, and this report made it very clear that Airbnb not only contributed billions of pounds to the economy, but also that it had a very small impact, if not no impact at all on that. So entire homes listed on Airbnb account for less than 0.7% of the total dwellings in the UK. However, the average Airbnb host rents their home for fewer than 3 days per month of those people. So that small percentage, and within that small percentage, only 3 days per month. When considering only those listings on Airbnb that hosted 90 nights or more, the proportion drops to even further, just 0.17% of the housing stock. So the conclusion of this was that the Airbnb specifically had little to no impact in the housing market. And again, if you haven't seen that report and that video that we've done, make sure you go back and read that. So I hope that that's the Labour government takes this report into consideration when looking at different sort of looking at what regulations they're going to put, because it's something that we do know is that Airbnb has little to no impact on the long-term rentals. So why would they try to look at the short-term rental industry and try to tax them to try and divert them from short-term into long-term? That would be an interesting question to ask. And to finish up, given that this video is about taxes, to finish up wise to tell you about switching to short-term, there was more incentive at the beginning of the year with regards to being short-term rental, because in the short-term rental, even if you weren't incorporated, you can still claim your interest rates as a cost, your mortgage interest rate as a cost if you have it on short-term rental, which is why a lot of landlords had decided to go to short-term, because they could still get that benefit. The government, of course, has come in and removed that benefit from short-term rental. So as long as you're not incorporated, it doesn't matter if you're short-term or long-term, you can no longer get that offset the cost of interest. So can small landlords still benefit from buy-to-let market despite these challenges? Yes, you can. You just need to make sure that you have it in the right structure. Speak to a professional property expert, speak to a tax expert. Yeah, there are, and I think right now offer some great opportunities with a lot of landlords who are falling into the trap of the scaremongering, who are deciding to exit the market, believing that the Labour government is going to make their investment much more risky. And as I said before, the real risk and the biggest, well, the number one mistake that landlords are making is already happening now, regardless of the government changes. And if you want to watch out for that video, subscribe to the channel, watch that video coming out on Saturday, which is very much the number one mistake the existing landlords are making right now and will continue to make despite the changes in legislation. So Jonathan, what advice would you give prior to the property investor looking to enter the buy-to-let market today? I would say make some great relationships with estate agencies. So hear me out. A lot of agents are sitting on portfolios of properties where landlords are wanting to exit the market, but don't want to put their property on the market. So there is a bunch of off-market properties that if you are looking to enter the market or expand your portfolio, that is not even a Rightmove or Zoopla. So you want to get in touch with those agents, be on their good books and find out what they have potentially that you can go and see off market and get some great deals out there. Right now is the time. So what advice? Okay, so you've got Edmund. What are the key tax efficient strategies landlords can explore to mitigate stricter tax rules? That's a great question. And you know what? That is for a video to come out very soon. I'm not a tax expert, so my advice would be number one, speak to a tax expert. Number two, look out for a video that's going to come out soon with regards to the tax efficiency strategies that we know right now, at least, that can be helpful for a lot of buy-to-let landlords out there. I hope that's helpful somewhat. If it's not that helpful right now, Edmund, it will be in the next few weeks if you're subscribed. So we have looked at, of course, the £2 billion that have dropped within a period of time, and this is from landlords' income rented. So incorporated landlords fell. Declared incorporated landlords fell from 4.9 billion in 2021-22 to 4.7 billion in 22 to 2023. And we do hear other articles saying that if the government keeps this up, where or tenants are going to be in trouble. We also looked at, of course, those build to rent that continues to increase. And then this last article, which is also with regards to the same sector, the London private rent sector contributes 14.6 billion to the economy. So you don't see this every day. This is saying that landlords are heroes for the economy. And by the way, this echoes something very similar to the Airbnb, right? Because Airbnb has been portrayed as a villain, right? They've been portrayed as villains, saying that they're removing, according to one Labour MP, that they have been taking thousands and thousands of pounds, thousands and thousands of homes off the long-term rental market. Just tuned in. More bad news. Hey, Rayleigh. Rayleigh, I think actually I have some good news, Rayleigh. Well, depends on whether you're a landlord or a tenant. But let me share. I was just sharing that Airbnb has been portrayed as the villain, whereby a Labour MP have said that thousands of homes have been turned to short-term rental, taken away from long-term. Now, we know from Airbnb that simply is not true. Short-term Airbnb at least has little to no impact on the housing market, and they've made that quite clear in their key findings on this report. But the other one that I wanted to share with you was sorry, I'm all over the place here, but the other report I wanted to share with you was this one, which actually you don't see this every day. London private rented sector contributes 14.6 billion to the economy. You won't see this on BBC News, would you? London private rental sector makes a gross value added contribution of 14.6 billion to the UK economy, according to an independent report commissioned by National Residential Landlord Association and Paragon Bank, entitled "The Economic Contribution of the Private Rented Sector." Delves into the economic value generated and supported by small, medium-sized landlords, those with 15 or fewer properties in England and Wales. The report states that the £14.6 billion economic contribution made by landlords, PRS, accounts for 2.6% regional GVA, which I'm going to guess is gross value added. The report also highlights that London's private rental market supports directly and indirectly 128,000 jobs. Again, directly or indirectly, it supports 128,000 jobs. Now, you may be thinking, well, how and where? Well, if we think about it, first of all, you have estate agents. You may say, I don't like estate agents. Okay, you may look at handymen, refurbishments. I don't know, you have cleaners in a lot of these properties. You've got mortgage brokers. You've got, property overall. You have a lot that goes into property. So I'm not surprised you've got construction, and it does move the economy. So the figure underlines the important role of the UK private rental sector. Further findings from the report reveals that the private rental sector contributes a total of 45 billion of GVA to the UK economy and supports approximately 390,000 jobs. So remember, this was in London alone, 128,000. If we look at the overall in England and Wales, we're looking at 390,000 jobs. Key industries which benefit PRS economic activity include construction, building maintenance, and public administration. So Ben Beadle, Chief Executive of National Residential Landlord Association, these findings underline the extent to which the PRS plays a pivotal role in delivering the much-needed investment in jobs. Although the national contribution of the PRS makes significant and positive impact, can be seen most clearly in the regional data featured in the report. It's important to remind that how the thriving private rental sector is in the interest of not only landlords and tenants, but also markets, wider supply chain, so forth and so forth and so forth. Not only does the London rental sector make a direct economic contribution, but it also supports the city's wider economic by providing housing of hundreds of thousands of tenants who are work in the city across the broad sectors. And this is a good point because if you know anything about London, we have missed the housing targets for years. Target has never been hit. Nowhere even close. I don't have the stats to share with you now, but we have shared this before. And so, again, landlords contribute billions to the economy, contributes to thousands of jobs, and the landlords are supplying hundreds of thousands of properties to much needed housing industry. Are they heroes? Are they villains? I don't know. You tell me. You're watching this, whether you're a renter, you're a tenant, you're a landlord, you're an agent. I'm always interested to find this out and see. So we have one last question by Edmund. Is the shift to short-term lets more beneficial than traditional buy-to-let given the new regulations? Great question. I'm going to wrap this up with regards to short-term let. If you're not sure whether short-term rent is for you, on the link on the description, book an appointment with me. I'll be happy to jump on a call with you. We'll have an assessment of your property or your properties, and we'll find out together whether short-term rental is going to be beneficial for you or not in comparison to the traditional. It has its benefits, yes, Edmund, for sure. You should expect more income to come in, but then you have more work to do, but also more expenses, and you need to know how to balance that out. To give you an example, a property that I saw a few weeks ago was getting an income in the region of £30,000. This was after paying the agents, the property management, and their letting fee. They were left with like £32,000, give or take. And then when converted into short-term rental, they were left something in the region of £48,000. So they were left with £20,000 plus, let's call it 20 grand, when taking into consideration the real costs of maintaining that short-term rental. They were left with around about £20,000 more, in fact. So to look at those numbers, feel free to jump on and book an appointment with me. But also have a look at the other videos. Guys, have a great evening. Today if you've missed this, look at the recording. We did look at a lot with regards to tax, the impact of Section 24, according to Property Mark. We also looked at the 2 billion decline in tax when it comes to HMRC. And we looked at the overall impact of other taxes and EPC ratings and landlords running for their lives, apparently. But again, there is no scaremongering on this channel. Review your current situation. There are a lot of landlords actually upscaling, so just don't be one of those landlords who just exit the market because you have fear of the unknown. Speak to a professional. Thank you, guys. Much appreciated. Stay safe.